All right. I want to do a run through of the practice test. We've here in week 5, we've got our first actual test, and I just want to use the practice test to show you how it's going to work and what you're supposed to have gotten done by this point. So the first thing to note is that the test becomes available at the end of this week. However, you can take it at any time. You don't have to take it by the date that it says it's on. That again is just those are rough guidelines that we're trying to use to keep track of things. So there's no penalty for doing anything late. And you can take this test at any time. I recommend taking it when the material is most fresh in your head. Once you open the test, though, it does have a timer on it. You will have an hour to do it, and there will be 10 questions. It is open book and open note. Basically, now that we're in the COVID world and we're doing all this online testing, a lot of teachers are trying to use very intrusive methods to keep people from cheating during the tests. And this is especially important in certain fields where, like nursing, where, you want your medical professionals to know anatomy and that sort of thing. But for this test, rather than trying to adopt really intrusive measures to see that you're not looking at your notes or looking up things on the internet, I'm just gonna let you use your notes. Use the book. Try and keep well organized notes, and this will help you. And that's just a decision that I've made about this class. I don't want to be spying on people all the time. All right, so let's take a look. The practice test was originally posted just as a Word document because that's the version of it I used in live classes. And I have transferred this online. Actually, I think to start with, rather than looking at the practice test, let's talk about the review sheet. So early on, I asked you to download a review sheet, and it just had a bunch of headings in it. Section 1 review sheet, and at various times I've asked you to use information that you took down on this sheet in exercises, right? Just to help you get a sense of who the characters are. One thing to note about this sheet is that it's divided into 5 sections, right? And each one has headings in it. The test is going to be organized in the same sections that the review sheet is. So there are 5 headings, and there are 10 questions on the test, so that's 2 per heading. So there are going to be 2 questions, for instance, on the characters. So here is a sample sheet of notes, and actually I imagine that you may have taken more notes than this. I just put this together just now to give you a sample of the sort of thing I was imagining. So you go to the practice test, and question 1, which of the following are true statements about Gila? So some of this should be just immediately obvious to you. So, right, you look, number 1, it's a treatment for cancer taken from the body of Henrietta Lacks. No, we know it's not that. It's highly toxic and can only be held in very secure labs. Let's set that one aside. It was the name for the immortal line of cancer cells taken from a tumor on Henrietta Lacks' cervix. We know that's correct. It is the nickname given by Henrietta Lacks by her cousin Day. We know that's not true. And we know it can be found in labs all over the world. Let's look at our notes. I imagine you've got notes like this. First immortal cell line is used in a standard model for studies. including things like development of polio vaccine. It can be found in labs all over the world. There's nothing in here about it being toxic. And if you remember, actually, we've got some in a refrigerator on campus at LCCC. So if you think it through, this toxic one is the tricky one, and you'll realize that can't be right. So the correct answers are these two. The machine will shuffle the answers, by the way. It also is going to give you random questions so that no two people are going to get the exact same test. The test questions are divided into 5 pools, and it's going to pull 2 questions at random from each pool. All right. What role did George and Margaret Guy play in the story of Henrietta Lacks? They were the scientists who created the first immortal cell line. So when you look at the other answers, it's important, I think, to read through all the answers rather than just leaping at the one that makes the most sense to you. There are only 10 questions on this test, and for most people, you'll have plenty of time to read everything carefully. Okay, so another alternative. They were the gynecologists who originally diagnosed Lacks with cervical cancer and took a biopsy of the tumor. No, that's not right. That is another guy named Howard Jones. They were lawyers representing the Lacks family in a suit against Johns Hopkins. Oh, that's just made up. You can read that and you see immediately that I just made that up. They were the gynecologists at Johns Hopkins who started the program of studying all tissue samples and medical records of patients at Hopkins. No, this is a description of Dick DeLinde, another researcher at Hopkins. So the answer here is the first one. Explain the concept of autonomy in 20 to 30 words. I'm serious about that word requirement there because I want you to give me some details. So I've repeated a whole bunch of times that autonomy is your right to control your own life. But that's only 9 words. You even have a counter down there that lets you know that. So we're going to want to give more detail here. Maybe you've got something on your review sheet. Well, in this sample review sheet, I've got plenty of notes here. And in addition, I wrote a note to myself saying that this is actually discussed in the video 2 PowerPoint, right? And so you may have downloaded that PowerPoint and you can find it right here. And what you can see is, you remember that is your autonomy is your right to control your own life. And it involves both being free of external constraints and internal constraints. So the easiest example of an internal constraint here is addiction. If you are addicted to, say, heroin, this is putting a limit on your autonomy. It's not coming from someone else, though. It's coming from inside you. So, well, what can we say over here? Let me go back to the test. You control your own life when not only are you free of external constraints, like someone holding a gun to your head, but also internal constraints, like addiction. And you put it that way, and actually we're up to 35 words. Doesn't matter. I really just, something in that ballpark is fine. Okay. So, pretty much all the test questions will look like that. The one thing that I want to call your attention to, because there will be a question like this on the test, is question 6, where you have to put an argument in so-called standard form with premises and conclusion marked. So you should remember that the idea of putting arguments in standard form came up in week 3 when we did this quick reading called A Quick Introduction to Argument. And we saw there that standard form was something like this, where we've got the game of Clue, where you've got a bunch of premises marked P1, P2, etc., and then you draw a line and then you write the conclusion. And we had some exercises where you had to put arguments like that in standard form. So this is just a question. There's going to be one on the test where you have to do that. So if you go here, here's your sample argument. Doctors should not have to ask permission to sell tissues they remove from your body as part of your treatment. We all benefit from the advancement that science makes through research on these tissues, and the burden of keeping track of such, of where tissue samples come from and where you can use it would be far too great. So there aren't any indicator words in this passage, but it sure as hell looks like this first statement is meant to be a conclusion, and the other two statements are meant to be premises. So what you're going to want to do here is you're just going to say conclusion, doctor should not have to ask permission, P1. We all benefit from the advancements that science makes. And P2, and here I'll just paraphrase, the burden of tracking permissions is too great. Let's take this all out of italics. So the idea here is that you just paraphrase the premises and the conclusion, and you write them like that. Let's go ahead and put in our little line. ... The Canvas isn't going to let you do fancy formatting. And the other thing that you want to say here is that there are no indicator words. Remember, if there are indicator words in the argument, like therefore and because, you do not include them when you write out the standard form. You write them below. And I will ding you a point if you don't write the indicator words separately or write no indicator words. Okay, so I'm not going to run through the rest of the test. It all pretty much looks like that. The other thing that I want you to do is to submit your review sheet just where you were taking your notes. So that goes here in the review sheet drop box, and you just submit the assignment there. And if you're taking your notes by hand, just take a picture of them. They don't have to be complete. I just want to confirm that you were doing the note taking that you're supposed to do. And my hope is, honestly, that if you go through the process of taking notes on everything, keeping your notes well organized, answering questions based on the notes, you're going to begin to absorb at least the important parts of the material, the basics of the story of Henrietta Lacks, the basics of important ethical ideas like autonomy and informed consent and clinical equipoise, that sort of thing. So good luck on the test.